Suddenly, Mars felt herself being lifted. Someone had scooped her up and carried her to safety. The door had slammed shut behind them, the frenzied bursts were gone, and Rafi's voice was the only sound she heard. "What are you doing in here?" he wanted to know. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart still racing madly. "I was looking for the kitchen so I could get a glass of water for the professor," she sobbed, "and then I was in the horrible place with all those crazy birds." "It was just an aviary," Rafe teased as she sat her down gently on her feet. "Don't be so cruel," her face pounded his chest. "Just because I am scared of birds, you shouldn't make fun of me." "Ah," Rafe told her mysteriously, "you've got ornithophobia." "What's that?" Mars demanded. "A fear of birds." He grinned and led her back upstairs. An hour later, Sergeant Sue finally finished taking Professor Zhang's statement and got to his feet. "If you think of anything else we should know, please call me." Alvin and his investigators said good night to the old man and promised to be in touch. They walked down the stairs with the sergeant. "Alvin, I don't like you being involved in this case," Sergeant Sue began firmly. "But Sergeant, it's just an ordinary robbery," Alvin protested. "I'm sure you don't think that for 1 minute," the sergeant shot him a knowing look. "Once there's been any violence, I'm afraid you have to drop the case and leave it to us. I don't want you or your investigators putting yourselves in danger while you're only trying to find a stuffed eagle," Alvin pleaded. "And so was the man on the motorbike," Sergeant Sue countered gruffly, opening the door of his police car and lowering himself into the seat. "I'm sorry, Alvin, but that's my decision. Drop the case." The police car disappeared down the drive, and Alvin and his investigators trudged towards the front gate in silence. After a while, Wailing glanced back at the house. "The professor's definitely got something to hide," she stated. "I wonder what it is," Cinchita mused. "I got the feeling that he's not telling us the truth about anything. Like when he swore that nothing had been stolen," Rafe noted. "I mean, how could he have known that? We hadn't even had a chance to see if anything was missing. Which means that whatever was valuable had already been stolen." Wailing continued his thought. Or, Azizu snapped his finger, or it hadn't been stolen because he'd hidden it somewhere else, where nobody would find it. "Great thinking, Azizu," agreed Alvin, slapping his friend on the back. "And what about the man on the motorbike? I think Professor Zhang knew who he was." Mars shuddered. "I don't like this case at all. Professor Zhang is weird. His house is weird. His birds are weird. Everything about him is weird. Can we find another mystery to solve?" "No," Alvin shook his head, his jaw set with determination. "We are going to solve the mystery of the missing eagle, whether Professor Zhang helps us or not." When they reached the street, they glanced around. The street lamps cast pools of light on the deserted roadway. Dense bushes and trees overhung the high fences on both sides of the road, shrouding them in shadows. Rafe flicked open his wallet and pulled off some money for Alvin. "It's too late to wait out here for a bus," he explained. "I'm going to call 2 taxis." It was another 10 minutes before 2 taxis arrived. Alvin, Wailing, and Azizu piled into the first cab, while Rafe, Mars, and Cinchita rode in the second. Cinchita stared out the gloomy gardens as the cab sped down the hill. "I wonder why Professor Zhang wants to leave all by himself in such a spooky house, she speculated. I guess he likes his privacy, Rafe replied. I'm glad to be out of there. Anyhow, I didn't want to wait around in case that man on the motorbike returned. Don't say things like that, Mas shuddered. You're giving me the creeps. Mas would have been even more frightened had she known that someone was lurking near the lift lobby of her apartment block, awaiting her return. The stranger crept to the shadows as Mas stepped out of the taxi and waved goodbye to Rafi. Mas hurried towards the lift when she heard footsteps behind her. She swung around and gasped. Edmund, what are you doing here? Cinchita kicked off her shoes at the front door and darted inside. The apartment was in darkness. The elderly wondered whether her mother was still at the office or out having dinner with one of her boyfriends. She shrugged. Her mind returned to an idea she had in the lift. Yes, I will, she told herself. When she opened her bedroom door, a furry shape flew across the room and into her arms. Hi, Kuching, she greeted her cats as she flicked on the lights. She dumped her back on the bed and ruffled Kuching's fur. Poor Kuching, it must be so boring being my cat, she whispered. Do you want to see what I drew today? She pulled out the sketches from her bag, and Kuching purred. When she held up her sketch of the bald eagle she'd drawn at the library, Kuching took one look at the enormous bird and dived under her bed. Cinchita shook her head. How can a cat be afraid of a bird? She giggled. Then she jumped up, determined to follow up on the idea that had formed in her mind. It was just a wild hunch, she knew, but worth checking. When her computer had booted up, she selected a search engine. Professor Zhang must be a professor of birds, she reasoned. What was the word for that? Ornithology? Right. So that means he was an ornithologist. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. She entered ornithologist and pressed search. She studied dozens of websites, but he wasn't listed on any of them. That's odd, she muttered and decided to search by name. She keyed in Professor Julius Zhang and sat back to wait. A moment later, she was bolt upright in her chair. Her eyes fixed on the screen in shock. Alvin, do I have a surprise for you? She cried aloud, and she began to print out the information. High in a building that towered over the city, the mysterious man, known only as the Snake, had called an emergency meeting. It was attended by a group of the most dangerous criminals wanted by the police. The Snake sat behind a silver screen so nobody could see his face and spoke to them through a special microphone that disguised his voice. When the Snake was talking, everybody listened carefully, and nobody dared to interrupt. They all knew the penalty for failure. The man we sent to see the professor has made matters worse. His search of the house proved fruitless and served only to attract the attention of the police. I have arranged for him to take a permanent holiday. His motorbike has been disposed of as well. The Snake's distorted voice rose to a fever pitch of anger. I do not tolerate failure of disloyalty. It would do well for all of you to remember that. A ripple of fear passed through the men in the room. They all knew how vicious the Snake would be. Professor Zhang did not honor his agreement with us. The Snake continued. We will now take steps to ensure that he does. I have drawn up a plan that will bring our project to a successful finish. The men nodded, relief on their faces, but it was short-lived. Unfortunately, John was foolish enough to try to get help, continued the snake. I have discovered that he went to see Alvin Sow and his young investigators, and I have been informed that they visited Birdwalk tonight, along with their friend Sergeant Sue. The snake paused to let the information sink in, and when he spoke again a sinister smile had entered his voice. While I have a certain affection for young Alvin, this is one time when we must not allow him to ruin our plans. I want to see him and his team completely eliminated. A tragic accident of some kind would be ideal, something that can be traced back to us. Whoever succeeds in the mission will earn a special bonus from me personally. Have I made myself clear?